Hello and welcome to the YouTube home of the Reptile Goth. Today we're going to talk about my Half Dome hike from June of 2019. First of all, a little background for the Half Dome hike for any of you who are interested. When Yosemite was first becoming popular with hikers, climbers, and tourists, they didn't think that Half Dome even could be climbed because most people were attempting it from that sheer face that everyone is used to seeing in postcards, videos, and pictures. However, in 1875, George Anderson went around the back and laid the groundwork for what eventually became the famous cables that allows hikers and adventurers every year to climb to the top of this granite monolith. Now, to be able to use those cables in modern times, you do need to get a permit because in years past, before the permit system was put into place, the lines were getting very long. They were seeing evidence of more injuries based on people trying to go around the line and taking risks that they really shouldn't. And there was damage to the surrounding environment. So to get these permits, you enter a lottery online through recreation.gov that opens on March 1st and closes the 31st. However, if you don't get a permit in the lottery, they do host daily lotteries throughout the season that the cables are up and available for use. The real beginning of my journey to the top of Half Dome started around the time when I was applying for my permit for the cables. On the webpage for the Half Dome hike on the National Park Service website, they have a number of suggestions and videos that anyone thinking about this hike should take very seriously. They list the recommended amount of water for different portions of the hike, since the entire Half Dome hike does also have the Mist Trail as a portion of it, which includes two popular viewpoints at the tops of Nevada and Vernal Falls. Also, I took a lot of time watching the videos about what to expect and reading blog posts of other people who have accomplished the hike in years prior to my own adventure. And most of these did prepare me for the mental turmoil I was going to have when I came face to face with the cables eventually, which there should be a photo about here-ish at this point to show you what I'm talking about. And also how drenched I was going to get on the Mist Trail, since I was attempting it early in the season when the waterfalls would be at their highest points. And basically the other parts of the hike that are considered strenuous, mainly because of the elevation gain and less so because of the mileage. However, there were parts of the hike that I was not prepared for that I don't think were really mentioned in any of the blog posts, any of the videos that I watched, and I would like to share that here so that anyone using this as a resource is not struck with the same terror that I felt at that moment. What I'm really referring to specifically is a fairly short portion of the hike right before you even get to the cables. Before you get to the base of the cables, you need to ascend the subdome. And for the most part, ascension of the subdome is not very difficult. It's a set of steep-ish switchbacks carved straight into the granite. However, they do end right before you get to the top, and there's a massive section that is a little bit smooth, and there's not anything to really grab onto. So essentially, most people do end up needing to bear crawl up and over that final crest before they can stand again on a solid surface. That terrified me. I wasn't ready for it, and I had the immediate instinct to turn back and say, screw this, I don't want to do it anymore. Luckily, I did have a partner with me who was able to convince me to make that crawl up to the top of the subdome. And because I overcame that bear crawl, the little narrow saddle that you need to walk across to get from the top of the subdome to the base of the cables didn't seem as bad as my mind had told me it was going to be. And after that, the cables weren't that bad. I knew what to expect. I knew not to look down, which I highly suggest you don't look down, by the way. And when the ranger checks your permit at the base of the subdome anyway, you will be told to put any water bottles, etc. that's not fixed to your bag with some sort of strap inside your bag. I also highly recommend doing this. As we were climbing up the cables, we did get a first-hand view of a Gatorade bottle plummeting down off the side of Half Dome, never to be seen again. And that does mess with your brain a little bit, because you are doing something that your body is going to tell you is not normal, is not natural. That incline you're climbing, even though it is one of the more shallow parts of Half Dome and possibly the only area that a hike up and not a full-on climb with rock climbing gear is possible, it still doesn't feel right. Like, you still feel that terror, and I do feel like this is something that is not really vocalized quite as much by some of the blogs and the videos I watched that highly romanticized it. But that fear was a big part of it for me, and I don't regret any of it. Because another magical thing happened on those cables. It was my first real interaction with the greater hiking community. And for a minute, it didn't matter what the reason to get up those cables were. Everyone was there to help and support everyone else. All of a sudden, we were on a journey with a bunch of other people to get to the top. Now, when I got to the top, it was amazing. I'm still not sure how to talk about it, but it was cold also. Very cold. It was like stepping onto another planet and staring down at the world of summer beneath you. But for some reason, you were freezing, and the wind it wasn't that bad that day, but it was still pretty strong. And yes, this is mentioned in a lot of the articles and videos, but if you don't have a sweater, you're probably not going to spend as long up there, because you are going to shiver, goosebumps are going to form, and it's going to take away a little bit from the experience. But I spent my time up there. It was amazing staring down at the valley and wondering why I couldn't find Half Dome, and then having that little part of me be like, because you're standing on it, idiot. But eventually, you do have to return back down. And every single thing you read and watch will tell you that the journey back down the cables is easier than the journey up, and that's bullshit. I'm telling you this right now. Yeah, physically it's easier. But mentally, you're sliding from the wooden post to wooden post. And even though, yeah, you keep telling yourself it's going to be fine, and you are probably going to be fine as long as you're holding onto the cable and taking your time, it still doesn't feel like that in your brain. And maybe someone braver than me won't have that experience, but it still feels like you're falling. It still feels unnatural. And especially since if you turn your head even slightly to the left or right, it's basically a sheer cliff. Like, it does mess with your head. I was lucky enough at the top to meet another hiker who was on his way back down. I never even got his name, but we talked the entire back way down, and he helped me return to the base of the cables and safely make it back to my partner. And if by some chance you're watching that, thanks, dude. I would have been terrified from fear on those cables. Appreciate it. However, once you get back to that top of the subdome, remember we talked about that bear crawl a few minutes ago? You gotta go back down that, and When that realization hit me, I immediately burst into tears. I didn't want to do it. There was, at least the cables, there was something to hold on to. But somehow my partner was able to convince me somehow that it was going to be okay and I wasn't going to just slide off the edge and kill myself. He was able to coax me back down to where the switchbacks began again. And I legitimately don't think that I would have been able to do that as smoothly had I not had that partner with me. The rest of the hike was fine. Like, we returned back down to the valley a little bit after sunset, and it was lovely. But the things that I highly recommend bringing with you on this hike that aren't really mentioned, because yeah, there's plenty of guides out there that are going to tell you exactly how much water to bring for your hike. They're going to recommend how much food you bring, how many snacks you should have. But there's a couple things that are a little lacking. I don't think that it's emphasized highly enough to bring a sweater of some sort. Even if it's not like a thick one, at least a light sweater, especially if you're starting before the sun rises, which is what I highly, highly suggest. The valley will still be very cool at that time, even if it's the middle of summer. Or if you're returning after sunset, which I don't necessarily suggest planning on that, but you know, some things happen. There's also the option, if you're not doing it as a day hike, camping in Little Yosemite Valley and doing it as a backpacking trip, which I can't really talk on because that's not how I did it. I did it as a day hike. I think we ended up clocking in at around closer to the 14-hour than the 12-hour end of the spectrum that's average. However, everyone does hike their own pace, and I don't remember exactly when we left on the trailhead and returned. But that's not really the point. The most valuable thing, however, it didn't matter that I had a nice first aid kit because I'm a little bit crazy when it comes to being prepared. It didn't matter that we had plenty of water and food. The thing that was most important and ended up to be the most useful thing was the fact that I brought such an awesome partner with me that was able to first convince me to get over the top of the subdome, which every part of me said, oh, hell no, this is where I back out. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. This seemed like a good idea months ago when I first applied. But now, but was able to convince me to come down and not need to call a rescue team to come get me, because I do believe that if I had someone that weren't as able to coax me down, I would have needed a rescue team to bring me back down, because I was getting to a point in my mental state that I didn't know how much farther I could go. So this hike is not only, it's worth it, believe me, is definitely worth it to overcome those things. But the things that I see stressed so much on these other sites is that it is a physically taxing hike, and I'm not going to take that away from it. It is the most difficult hike I have ever done. And it's not necessarily the longest hike I've ever done. It's only about 14 miles round trip, but that altitude gain is absolutely killer. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at that, but it is. It's not just that you go up that, you gain that much altitude, it's that you gain it fast. We were lucky enough that this hike happened at the end of our trip, so we were already acclimated to the Sierras. But the fact that on the website they do stress altitude sickness is serious, it is. Do not take that lightly. But also don't take lightly the fact that this hike also includes many things that are going to tax you mentally. And that is a big part of it. And don't feel ashamed if for some reason you don't get to the top of the cables. Because that in and of itself, if you mentally, your brain is telling you to turn back down and you're going to ignore that, you're more likely to get hurt. So take into account the physical stress it's going to put on your body and the mental stress, because I don't think the mental stress is really emphasized enough with this hike. And in addition to your normal gear that you would bring on any other long hike, bring a good hiking partner that's going to be able to help you get over those mental hurdles. It might save your life. All right, guys, that's all I really have for you today. I am also linking in the description below an article I have that goes a little bit more into detail than I did in this video, and also a blog post from a few months ago that is a more romanticized version of the hike as a whole, if that's more your style. So like, comment, subscribe, and check out all my socials for any future updates. See you next time.